There are things you did every day in the 1970s without thinking that today could land you in serious trouble. Picture a quiet British street, early evening, when the sun is dipping just behind the rooftops and the air smells faintly of baking bread and wet pavement. Children run ahead, their laughter echoing between brick houses, and neighbors nod as they tend to their gardens. Life moved at a slower pace, yet it felt perfectly complete. No signs, no warnings, no one telling you not to, and yet, today it's against the law. If you grew up in Britain back then, you'll remember this even if you've never stopped to think about it. The simplicity of daily routines, the tiny freedoms we hardly noticed, shaped our lives quietly but profoundly. Crossing the road without someone holding your hand, cycling down streets without helmets, or even leaving the house for hours without anyone raising an eyebrow. These were just ordinary moments. They felt safe, normal, unquestioned. Here on Past Britannia, we don't just remember the past, we step back into it. If these memories still live somewhere inside you, do tap subscribe and give the video a like so we can keep them alive together. And the first everyday habit we're about to revisit is something millions of Britons did, without a second thought. It's small, it's ordinary, and yet, in today's world, it would be completely unimaginable. But back then, it was just life. Britain in the 1970s moved at a different rhythm. The streets were quieter, not because people stayed indoors, but because life simply wasn't as rushed. Shops opened on time, children played outside until the street lamps flickered on, and neighbors spoke across garden fences without glancing at their watches. There were fewer rules, fewer notices pinned to doors or walls, and far less instruction on how to live each day. People relied on common sense and the shared understanding of a community, an invisible agreement about what was safe, what was polite, and what simply worked. Everywhere you looked, from the terraced homes to the corner shops, life carried a sense of ease. Schools expected children to learn manners as much as lessons. Local shopkeepers trusted customers to pay later if they ran short. Even small journeys walking to a friend's house or cycling to the sweet shop were governed more by instinct than by regulation. Less paperwork, fewer warnings, more trust. Authority existed, of course, but it didn't hover over every action. It was a presence in the background, not a constant interruption. Life felt slower but somehow fuller. There was room for mistakes, for improvisation, for laughter in unexpected places, and often, rules only arrived after something went wrong, rather than preventing it from happening in the first place. A spill on a school playground might eventually lead to new guidance. A neighborhood mishap could quietly inspire a local bylaw. Many laws we live with today were born quietly, one ordinary habit at a time. They didn't announce themselves. They slipped into everyday life, often unnoticed, and it often started with something so small, so mundane, that no one imagined it would ever be banned. A simple, harmless routine repeated by thousands would eventually vanish under the weight of new rules, leaving us to look back and wonder how life could have been so different. It is these ordinary everyday moments, the habits, the freedoms, the small routines that we are about to explore. And the first one is perhaps the most surprising of all. It's easy to forget just how different everyday life felt back then. Children traveled in cars without the restraints we now consider essential. Their small hands pressed against the window, the wind tugging at hair, laughter spilling freely in the back seat. It wasn't recklessness. It was simply the rhythm of life, guided by instinct and common sense rather than rules printed on signs. Playing outside meant venturing down streets and through alleyways far from home, often without a parent in sight, yet always returning when the light faded. There was a trust in the world, in neighbors, in familiar routines, in the simple understanding that most people looked out for one another. Shopping for everyday items had its own charm. The local corner shop stocked sweets, small toys, and household items without the age warnings or official restrictions we now take for granted. You could pick something up, hand over your coins, and carry it home. No forms, no questions, just a brief exchange of a nod or a smile. The clink of coins on the counter, the rustle of paper bags, the faint smell of fresh bread from the bakery next door. These details shaped the small, comforting patterns of life. Back then, habit and trust guided behavior. Doors closed behind you without a thought. Bicycles leaned against fences. Parcels left outside for collection remained untouched until retrieved. It was an era of quiet certainty, where everyone knew their place, and small freedoms were taken for granted. Today, those same streets would be lined with guidance, notices, warnings, and instructions. Every movement seems watched, recorded, or regulated. A world where instinct has been replaced by signage and habit has been replaced by procedure. No one felt reckless, it was simply how life worked. The small liberties, the tiny rhythms of daily existence, were woven into the fabric of childhood, family, and community. And yet, even in these harmless routines, the seeds of change were already stirring. Some of the freedoms we took for granted weren't lost because they were dangerous. They quietly disappeared, replaced by rules that arrived without fanfare, often unnoticed until the world felt subtly different. But that was only the beginning. Because some changes didn't come from danger, they came from silence. It's in these unnoticed shifts that the 1970s begin to reveal just how much life has transformed. And the next story shows just how ordinary habits became extraordinary in retrospect. Some of the most remarkable changes to everyday life weren't dramatic at all. They happened quietly, almost imperceptibly, as if the world had shifted while no one was looking. Behaviors that had seemed completely ordinary were phased out gradually, not suddenly. A practice that felt second nature one year would slowly vanish the next, replaced by a new expectation, a new rule, or a new notice pinned to a wall. Often people barely noticed the switch, until one day they realized the old freedom was gone. There are so many forgotten truths from that time. Children no longer wandered the streets unsupervised, yet few could pinpoint exactly when the change occurred. Shops now request identification for simple purchases that once required only a polite word. Traditions quietly retired: the impromptu games on street corners, the neighborhood gatherings in back gardens, the casual trust that a parcel left on the doorstep would remain untouched. Everyday freedoms were replaced with paperwork and permissions, and routines that had been instinctive suddenly required consent or caution. The social shift was subtle but profound. What had once been governed by community judgment, the shared understanding that people looked out for one another, moved toward official regulation. Everyone knew became "you must be told." It was a slow recalibration of trust and responsibility, often implemented with good intentions, yet leaving a faint sense of loss. Most people don't remember when these things ended, only that one day, they were gone. That invisible line between past and present leaves an odd sensation, a mix of admiration for the old freedoms and recognition of the safety and certainty we now enjoy. It wasn't danger that drove these changes. Often it was silence, bureaucracy, and an evolving sense of responsibility. Small habits disappeared quietly, leaving the streets calmer but emptier, the local shop more regulated but less spontaneous, and childhoods structured but less free. And this leads to the question many people still ask today when we look back at that lost Britain. What exactly did we miss the most? The freedom, the trust, or simply the unspoken rhythms of everyday life that made life feel slower, yet somehow fuller? The answer is subtle, and it is wrapped up in the memories we still carry, tucked away in the small details that shaped a generation. Looking back, it's tempting to romanticize the past, but this isn't about saying one era was better than another. It's about understanding how life felt, and how the simple act of living changed when the rules around us shifted. In the 1970s, daily life carried a subtle rhythm, one guided more by instinct, trust, and personal judgment than by signs or regulations. You didn't worry constantly about doing things wrong. There was a quiet freedom in the knowledge that you were largely trusted to make your own decisions, to navigate streets, shops, and playgrounds with confidence. People miss that freedom more than they often realize. It wasn't about breaking rules or taking risks. It was about the space to move, to explore, and to interact without constant oversight. You could leave your bicycle leaning against a fence, or pop into the corner shop for a packet of sweets, and the world quietly assumed you would behave responsibly. That sense of trust, of community understanding, shaped how people thought, acted, and related to one another. You didn't feel monitored, you felt trusted. And that trust shaped a generation. It fostered independence, a confidence in judgment, and a connection to the familiar patterns of everyday life. Even the smallest moments, walking to school alone, chatting with a neighbor, or playing freely in the street, carried a sense of autonomy that seems almost foreign today. There is, of course, a sense of loss when we look back. These freedoms have largely disappeared, replaced by guidance, permissions, and structured oversight. But there is no bitterness here, only reflection. Life has changed, yes, but remembering it allows us to feel the texture of those quiet moments, the small joys, and the trust that once wrapped around our daily routines. It's a gentle nostalgia, a connection to a time when life felt slower but somehow fuller. Looking back, it's clear that life in the 1970s was both simpler and, in many ways, freer. We gained so much over the decades: safety measures, clear guidance, and consistent rules that protect us in ways we often take for granted. Crossing the street, buying everyday items, or letting children play outside is now governed by systems designed to keep everyone secure. Those improvements are real and meaningful, and they have shaped the Britain we live in today. But with those gains, we also lost something harder to measure: the ease of daily life, the unspoken understanding between neighbors, the instinctive freedoms we once carried. These have quietly faded. There was a rhythm to existence back then, a trust that allowed life to flow with a confidence we seldom feel now. Simple routines carried comfort and connection, small liberties that made the world feel familiar and welcoming. Do you remember doing any of these things? Take a moment to think back, and if these memories resonate, send this to someone who lived through it with you. Because the past doesn't disappear, it lives in the small things we remember. And even as the world changes, those memories quietly shape who we are and how we look at the world around us.